Are we truly alone? Humanity has long assumed itself to be the pinnacle of intelligence in the universe, but is that actually true? In an infinite cosmos with infinite opportunities for life to emerge, the odds that we are the sole intelligent beings seem remarkably slim. Most people can follow that reasoning without much resistance. The idea that aliens might exist somewhere out there is one thing, but accepting that they could already be here is something else entirely. The notion of technologically advanced craft with unknown intentions silently observing us is deeply unsettling. At least, that was my position until not long ago. Researchers have now identified signs of metallic, reflective objects embedded in star charts that predate the launch of the very first satellites. Do these objects have a rational explanation, or do they represent some of the most compelling evidence ever gathered that non-human intelligences have paid our planet a visit? I'm Alex MacHolgan, and you're watching Astrum. Join me as we examine an extraordinary claim and ask whether the evidence is strong enough to support it. Unexplained objects appearing in our skies are nothing new, nor do they automatically point toward extraterrestrial visitors. They are simply that, things we haven't yet explained. Throughout history, human beings have had a persistent tendency to witness something strange and immediately attach a supernatural meaning to it. Thunder was interpreted as divine anger. A comet was seen as a warning of disaster ahead. As our collective understanding of the natural world deepened, these once mysterious events found scientific homes. Lightning became a discharge of electricity. Comets were revealed to be frozen bodies of ice and rock tracing paths around the sun. Even so, certain historical accounts resist easy categorization. Many of these reports stretch far back into recorded history, long before powered flight was even conceivable, and yet they describe what sound unmistakably like artificial objects moving through the sky. Consider, for instance, this account published in a newspaper from the German city of Nuremberg in 1561. According to the writer, on the morning of April 14th, between 4 and 5 in the morning, a large number of residents witnessed strange crescents, spheres, and cylindrical forms appearing above the city. These objects appeared to engage one another in some kind of aerial conflict. The globes darted back and forth, clashing in a scene described as resembling human combat, lasting for well over an hour. Eventually, exhausted by the encounter, they reportedly fell from the sky and struck the ground, generating enormous plumes of smoke. Following all of this, a massive black spear-like shape appeared, its tip oriented to the east, while its base pointed west. The author of the account attributed everything to a message from God, presumably a call for the people to reconsider their ways. But through a modern lens, the imagery of fire trailing from crashed objects and thick smoke rising from the ground is surprisingly easy to read as a downed aircraft leaking burning fuel. And for anyone familiar with UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomena, as they are increasingly referred to today in an effort to strip away the ridicule often attached to the subject, the recurring descriptions of spheres, elongated shapes, and large dark triangles feel remarkably consistent. UAP frequently resist conventional explanation. The Pentagon has released a considerable archive of declassified footage in recent years that has added weight to the conversation. But the difficulty with historical accounts like the Nuremberg report is that they offer almost nothing in the way of scientific rigor. What can we actually derive from a single newspaper article? Only that one writer claimed a number of people witnessed something unusual. Even granting that every witness was completely honest, there is no way to rule out some unusual atmospheric or meteorological event. There is no physical evidence, no recovered debris, no follow-up documentation, and every person present has been dead for centuries. The information simply isn't there to draw any firm conclusion. Various alternative explanations have been proposed over the years, from rare optical effects like sundogs to spontaneous fireworks displays. Without more data, none of these can be confirmed or eliminated. What a claim of this magnitude genuinely requires is a rigorous, data-driven scientific approach, built on thousands of observations gathered using modern instrumentation. Ideally, thousands of independent sightings of these objects would need to be catalogued and analyzed. And that is precisely what Beatrice Villaroel, a Swedish astronomer working within the Vasco project, has attempted across a series of papers released over the past year. Her methodology was genuinely inventive. Her team, operating under the Vanishing and Appearing Sources During a Century of Observations project, originally set out to investigate the phenomenon of disappearing stars, celestial bodies that had been recorded in sky surveys during the 1950s but could no longer be detected. Their primary historical dataset came from digitized photographic plates produced by the Palomar Observatory, which had been in operation since 1928, while more recent records were drawn from surveys like the Pan-STARRS data release. Their search turned up roughly 100 instances of stars that had seemingly vanished, which is a fascinating result in its own right, and gives scientists new puzzles to solve regarding stellar behavior. But what caught Villarroel's attention more acutely was the discovery of 9 light sources that appeared on one plate without any trace on a plate taken just 30 minutes earlier, and then disappeared entirely within 6 days. These brief flickers of light, labeled transients by the research team, proved stubbornly difficult to account for. Villarroel published a paper in 2021 in which she worked methodically through the most plausible explanations and found each one wanting. The transients did not match the signatures of asteroids, distant galaxies, passing aircraft, or gamma-ray bursts. She acknowledged that certain kinds of high-energy contamination of photographic plates, such as radiation produced by nuclear weapons testing, could generate similar-looking artifacts, and the Palomar Observatory in California sits not far from a former nuclear test site in Nevada. However, no officially recorded atomic tests took place between 1949 and 1951, which made radioactive contamination an unlikely culprit. A second candidate explanation offered a more intriguing wrinkle. The profile of the transients bore a notable resemblance to satellites catching sunlight as they passed overhead. The problem, of course, was that the star maps in question dated to 1950. Sputnik, humanity's first artificial satellite, didn't reach orbit until 1957. That particular explanation collapsed immediately. Nevertheless, Villarroel and her colleagues sensed they were tracking something worth pursuing. In October 2025, they disclosed the full extent of their follow-up investigation. Across 2 papers published within days of each other, the team revealed they had uncovered more than 100,000 transients across nearly a decade's worth of Palomar plates, spanning 1949 to 1957. This time, the researchers were prepared to state their hypothesis plainly. A meaningful proportion of these transients appeared to be metallic, reflective objects in roughly geosynchronous orbits around Earth, likely of unknown origin, and they set out to prove it. 2 main lines of evidence were used to test this hypothesis. The first involved ruling out the possibility that the transients were simply defects or contamination on the plates, or background celestial objects. To demonstrate that at least some were genuine objects orbiting in the sky above Earth, the team turned to a clever natural test, the shadow cast by the Earth itself. If the transients were plate defects, there would be no reason for them to cluster in any particular region of the sky. The same logic applied if they were flaring galaxies or similar deep space events. But if they were reflective objects glinting in sunlight, they would vanish each time they passed through the Earth's shadow. Statistical analysis of the dataset revealed a significant reduction in transient appearances within that shadow zone compared to illuminated regions of sky. The majority of transients remained ambiguous, potentially attributable to stars or plate artifacts, but 349 of the detections appeared consistent with sunlight-reflecting objects located within Earth's gravitational sphere. The second line of inquiry examined the behavioral patterns of the transients, and here 2 results stood out sharply. First, by cross-referencing the astronomical data with publicly reported UFO sightings, Villarroel's team found that transients appeared in greater numbers on days when UFO reports were filed on the ground. Each reported sighting corresponded to an 8.5% increase in transient detections. This was a striking correlation, given that members of the public would have had no awareness of what was or wasn't appearing in photographic plates recorded in space. Villarroel concluded that whatever the transients were, they appeared meaningfully connected to UFO activity on Earth. Second, transient numbers showed a 45% increase in the day following a nuclear weapons test. This might seem puzzling at first. Why would UAP, if that's what these objects were, respond to nuclear detonations? But this observation connects to something the UAP research community has raised repeatedly. These phenomena appear to show a particular interest in nuclear weapons and facilities. On the night of October 23rd to 24th, 2010, multiple groups of military personnel reportedly observed a cigar-shaped object hovering over F.E. Warren Air Force Base in Wyoming, a facility housing 50 Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missiles. What followed was alarming. All 50 missiles simultaneously dropped offline. This type of mass failure had no precedent. Individual missile errors had occurred before, but the complete shutdown of an entire squadron was unheard of, and represented a serious breach of national security. The missile failure itself is a documented fact, even if the UAP element was omitted from the Air Force's official account. If an extraterrestrial intelligence were present and monitoring human activity, it would not be unreasonable for it to take a keen interest in weapons capable of ending civilization, and perhaps to demonstrate that it had the ability to neutralize them if necessary. This is not an isolated incident. An even more disturbing account reportedly exists in Soviet records from 1982, in which a UAP hovered above a Soviet nuclear base for 4 hours before apparently triggering the launch sequence of intercontinental ballistic missiles. The missiles began their sequence and could not be stopped until the object departed, at which point control was restored. In that light, Villarreal's correlation between transient activity and nuclear testing takes on a different weight. While the anecdotal stories involving nuclear facilities are thought-provoking, this is the first time large-scale empirical data has been used to establish a statistical link. Alternative explanations exist, of course. Nuclear detonations produce complex atmospheric effects that are not yet fully understood, but Villarreal finds it implausible that these would manifest as the kind of visual signatures captured in the plates, particularly given that most transients appeared the day after the tests, not during them. An atmospheric disturbance sustaining in a fixed location for nearly 24 hours would be deeply unusual, and the expected appearance of such effects differs considerably from what the transients actually look like. So what conclusions can we draw? Does this constitute genuine proof that metallic objects have been orbiting Earth since at least the early 1950s, and quite possibly long before? Extending the analysis forward in time is now virtually impossible, since thousands of human-made satellites now crowd the same orbital regions, and any anomalous objects would be undetectable amid the clutter. But should we take Villarreal's papers at face value? Not without some caution, because the scientific community has responded with notable skepticism. The work was not accepted by Archive, a widely used platform for sharing pre-publication scientific papers for community review. A notable exclusion, given that Archive accepts a broad range of submissions. Its moderators judged the work insufficiently original and lacking the depth expected of substantive scholarly research, a verdict that Villarreal found deeply frustrating. She was not alone in facing pushback. Sean Kirkpatrick, the former director of AERO, the U.S. government body created specifically to investigate UAP, has publicly disagreed with her conclusions, suggesting that solar flares or high-altitude balloons offer more satisfactory explanations. He did not, however, publish a formal paper to support that position. The researchers who did produce a formal rebuttal were Wesley Andre Waters and his colleagues, whose paper, Critical Evaluation of Studies Alleging Evidence for Technosignatures in the POS-1E Photographic Plates, was accepted by Archive and mounts a detailed challenge to Villarreal's findings. Their central arguments are substantial. They contend that the most reliable way to determine whether individual transients were real objects or plate defects was to physically examine the original POS-1E plates under a microscope rather than relying on digitized reproductions, as Villarreal's team had done. This would immediately reveal whether a given transient corresponded to a genuine photographic exposure or a scratch or blemish on the plate surface. That step was not taken. Waters and his team also challenged the composition of Villarreal's dataset. They were unable to reproduce her collection of transients from the full available data pool, and suggested she had drawn from a broader, less carefully filtered set of objects than was appropriate for this kind of analysis. When they applied more stringent filtering to remove extraneous noise, much of Villarreal's statistical case weakened considerably. The reduction in transients within Earth's shadow, the cornerstone of her argument that the objects were physically real and orbiting the planet, was no longer statistically significant once their cleaned dataset was applied. Without that result, there is no longer a scientific basis for claiming the transients were reflective objects rather than artifacts. Additionally, they examined the scheduling patterns of the Palomar telescope and found that the observatory was 35% more likely to be conducting exposures during the windows when nuclear tests occurred. Villarreal had not adequately corrected for this imbalance, which meant that what appeared to be a meaningful spike in transients following nuclear events was partly an artifact of observational scheduling rather than a genuine pattern. Several further objections were raised, but these represented the most significant blows to Villarroel's conclusions. Her entire case rested on statistical demonstration. Once the shadow correlation dissolved and the nuclear uptick was reframed as a scheduling artifact, the evidence for intentional, physically real orbiting objects lost its foundation. Villarroel subsequently published a formal response, titled, "With a Certain Pointed Precision, a Response to Paper Critical Evaluation of Studies, alleging evidence for technosignatures in the POS-1E photographic plates by Waters et al., which Archive did elect to publish." In it, she addressed the dataset criticism by noting that if Waters had questions about her data, a simple email would have sufficed, a reminder that academic disputes can carry the same undercurrent of frustration as any other human disagreement. On the substance, she argued that Waters' more heavily filtered dataset was actually counterproductive. By removing the majority of transients, it left a sample of just over 5,000 from an original pool of roughly 100,000, which she maintains is far too small for meaningful statistical analysis. As for the nuclear scheduling issue, she recalculated the figures using the POS-1 data with proper weighting, and still found an 11% uptick in transients during nuclear test windows, smaller than her initial estimate, but present nonetheless. The implied message was clear. A follow-up response paper is presumably on its way, and one suspects it will be no less pointed in its conclusions. So what do we make of all this? Beyond the observation that scientists are as capable of a good argument as anyone else. Whether this constitutes definitive proof remains genuinely uncertain. Personally, I find the underlying approach compelling. The concept of searching for anomalous objects in pre-satellite astronomical records is creative and scientifically legitimate. If even a portion of these transients can be independently confirmed as metallic, sunlight-reflecting objects in orbit above Earth during a period that predates the human space age, that finding would be remarkable and worthy of serious further investigation. And if they are genuinely there, the question of what they are becomes urgent. Some previously unknown natural phenomenon, unusually reflective near-Earth objects perhaps, or something deliberately constructed. If the answer is the latter, it would force a profound reassessment of how we understand our place in the universe. We have long imagined ourselves as the dominant presence on this small, pale world. What happens the moment we have to reckon with the possibility that something far older, far more capable, and far more patient has been watching us all along? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Astrum exists not only through sponsorships and advertising. It grows because of the people who support it through Patreon. Joining means helping us produce more and better content, and keeping space science accessible to everyone. Patreon is where those who genuinely love space come together to make sure these videos continue to be made. Members get ad-free viewing, early access,